So this is my oxyacetylene torch brazing rig that I use, with bicycles. And so this is one possible setup. So I'm going to go over the different pieces that I have and what they are and why. And I'm also going to talk about some other possible setups that you might want for, the bicycle application. Let's get into it. So this is one possible setup, right? These are relatively small oxyacetylene tanks, and I got these because these were the largest size that I could buy outright from Airgas. And so I own these tanks. That's how they do it. I bring them in to get them refilled, and they actually get swapped out for other physical tanks, but I own these tanks. That's how Airgas does it. If I wanted a larger size tank, I would have had to rent it, which came with like an annual rental fee, and I just didn't really feel like doing that, so I bought these. I think there's a way to get bigger tanks that you own, but I'm just not really sure how to do that. And so I figured I would start with these, and then I would figure out a bigger tank if I was demanding a large volume. When you have a larger size tank and you go to get it refilled, you get a much better price on the gas. However, if you're learning and getting started, you're probably not going to need a huge volume, and the bigger tanks are more of a pain in the ass to carry around and all that stuff. So I wasn't that concerned with getting huge tanks for starters. You can imagine if you bought smaller tanks like this and then you did a huge volume of brazing and you were going through gas all the time and getting them refilled, you could keep these around as your backup. That way, when your big tank ran out, you could go and get them refilled within a couple days or something, and you could keep these as your backup just to keep you stocked. Or for instance, if you're building on nights and weekends, that's when the welding supply store is closed. And if you're in the middle of a braze and you realize you're like running out of oxygen or something, if it's like Saturday morning or whatever, because that you have a day job and now you're finally in your shop, that's when the welding supply store is closed and you're screwed. And so it can be nice to have this stuff on hand. So anyway, those are the tanks. Ideally you'd have bigger ones. I made this strap, and there's a chain just for safety. You don't want these things tipping over. When you move them, you have the caps on there and it protects them, but in place you want to have something that straps them or chains them down so that they can't get tipped over. Now on the tanks, I have pretty nice regulators. These are Smith dual stage regulators, and these were recommended to me by Doug Faddick, my brazing, my frame building instructor. And the idea is that, within any regulator, there's a diaphragm and there's a spring, and you can look up a schematic and it shows how these work. They're pretty simple on the inside, but it just regulates the pressure from what's in the bottle to what you want in the hose. So if there's like, on a full tank, there's like 2,200 pounds or something of pressure, and you actually want to bring that down to like 10 pounds to actually use it. You want to bring it down to something real low. You have a regulator and a dual stage regulator. The idea is that it provides a more stable flow of gas that's less influenced by, it's more stable. It's not as fickle as if you had a single stage regulator. And so, I don't know, that was what I was told. And so wanting to make things easier on myself to get my best work, that's what I bought. I'm maybe a little bit skeptical that I needed to spend, I think the two of these regulators were close to $500. I don't know if I needed to spend that much money to get started, but that's what I did at the time, and they're certainly nice. I do like them. So coming out of the regulators, I have this Kevlar hose, and in the frame building class that I took with Doug Faddick, he had these, and they are great. If you look at what most torch rigs come with, it's this heavy rubber hose, and it's heavy. It doesn't like to bend like this, and it doesn't want to twist around either. So if you look at the end of the torch, you can just bend it any which way, and you can twist it around, and it allows you to kind of get the tip right where you want it, and you're not fighting the hose so much. So that's the idea with these Kevlar hoses. Now I think this length is only like 10 feet or something, and it was $70 or $80, so it's kind of expensive for how much you get. And then if you get if you're brazing and you have the liquid flux or the pasty flux, when it gets hot, it's like 900 degrees, 1,000 degrees, whatever it is, even hotter, as it drips off, if it lands on the hose, you can burn a hole in your hose. That's what they say. I haven't done it because I've been careful, but you would hate to ruin a nice set of hoses that easily. So it's a consideration. Are you trying to get something that's lightweight that allows you to do your best work? Are you hard on your stuff and you know that, and you want something that's more reliable? That's a choice for you. I bought the nice ones because I figured I'm pretty gentle with my stuff, and I wanted something that was going to allow me to do my best work. Similarly, I bought a small torch. So this is a Victor J28, I believe, and this torch is I think is the aircraft style torch, and you know the idea is it's like smaller. I don't know if you can get as much of a massive flame out of this, or like you can't get a big cutting torch attachment on here, but it's really nice because for brazing bicycles you don't need a ton of heat, and this is a smaller package. It's lighter weight. Traditionally, most like heavy duty torches, general purpose torches, these knobs for your oxygen and your acetylene are going to be down here, and then you have this longer, heavier handle, and so this is a lighter weight body with your knobs right up here, which doesn't matter that much, but it's just kind of nice. You have different interchangeable tips, of course, and so you know, this is a number 1. I think I have a 1 and a 0, and you know, I'm just not that fussy with it. I usually make do with what I have, and so I'll adjust a bigger or a smaller flame according to my needs at the moment. I'm not an expert brazier, and I think you know, to some degree you can adjust your flame within the tip size that you have, but there's only so far you really want to push it before it's better to switch to a different size tip. And so it would be good to have a collection of tips, and you know, just so you have that flexibility. But you know, I'm not an expert with any of this stuff, and I just I would get the job done with what I had, and I think this is the one that I kept on most of the time, was just the number 1 tip, and I would get it done with this, and it worked fine for me. I have flashback arresters here. I believe that's what these are, so that, you know, if you were to have a flame inside of here, it can't go back through the hose. I don't know how much of a risk there is of that happening, but they either came with the torch or they were not a whole lot of extra money, and so I just have them on here. And so this right here is a pretty good system. You know, you have the nice regulators, and you have the nice hose and the nice lightweight torch, and it really allows you to do that detail-oriented work, to really, you know, focus and control the flame without a heavy hose or a heavy torch or crappy regulators making it hard for you to do good work. This isn't the only way to do it, though. You know, you could buy a much cheaper set of regulators, and you know, like on my dad's farm, he had this massive cutting torch, and it was, you know, it was 2 or 3 times as heavy. It was a lot longer, and it had the cutting torch attachment, and you could, you know, you could braze stuff if you had to, and people do that. So there's all different ways to do it, and you don't need to have. It's my dog over there. You don't need to have all the nicest equipment in the world just to get started brazing stuff. So I've never brazed with Oxy Propane, but I'll talk about it for a minute because I think it's really relevant to the home gamer. Somebody working in a small shop can really be helpful. So when I got set up with these, I had to make an account with the local welding place, and I have one with the company Airgas, which here in Syracuse, New York, you know, they have locations, and I think they have locations a lot of places. But there was a form, and you know, I had to do, it was like a little bit less user-friendly than just walking into some place and whatever. So another option is doing Oxy Propane brazing. And so I think the chemistry of this is that if you use acetylene as your fuel with oxygen, you get a hotter flame, you get a hotter inner cone tip. I think it's like, it's been years since I've looked this up. I think it's like 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit for your inner cone tip with acetylene, and it's like 5,400 or something. It's less with propane. And so there are applications where you need that hot heat that you get from acetylene, and there are applications where it's fine to use propane. And if you do have an oxy propane setup, the beauty is that, you know, acetylene is more regulated and it's more expensive and complicated. You can go to any old gas station or whatever, and you can swap out your barbecue grill tank for you know, like for another tank of propane, and you probably can do that on a Saturday. And it's just a simpler setup if you're doing a low volume of stuff. So if you're doing like commercial application, big stuff, you probably just want to get acetylene. It's hotter. When you buy it in quantity, it maybe doesn't save you any money to get propane. But when you're small scale, propane can be great. And then the other thing about an oxy propane setup, if you get like a barbecue size tank for your grill, and then you can get, so for the medical industry, for people who have a hard time breathing and they need oxygen to supplement their breathing, you can use tanks, and you can get tanks of oxygen and you can cart them around. But they also have I don't know what they're called, oxygen accumulators or something. They make these machines for people who need oxygen to help them breathe. And you can use one of those as a source of oxygen, right? So if you just burn acetylene or propane into the air, it doesn't burn that hot. And when you add pure oxygen, O2, it really can burn hot. And so that's the whole trick of like getting a more powerful, hotter, more focused flame. And so you need that oxygen source. And again, the oxygen like this you would get from like a welding supply place or maybe a medical place. That'd probably be more expensive. But if you can get one of these oxygen accumulators or whatever they're called for the medical purposes, that can produce apparently enough oxygen for low duty, torch work like this, where you just have a small heating tip and you're just brazing a lugged joint or a braze-on or something. And so in those applications, I've heard, I haven't looked at this up myself, but just to pass on the information I've heard, is that it can be hard or impossible to legally buy those systems if you don't have like a prescription requiring that sort of, it's apparently regulated that way, or maybe just buying one new is expensive. But what I've heard people suggest is that if you want to get one of those oxygen producing machines, you would look on Craigslist, and if you wait around and look or whatever, you can find them occasionally, and then you can just plug that into like a standard power outlet like this, and it will produce enough oxygen for you to do some brazing. So I haven't looked into that and studied that, but if you go and search online, some of the old frame building forums and stuff had information about that. And for me, I just got these tanks. It wasn't that much work, but depending on where you live, like if you have an apartment and your landlord doesn't want to see this stuff around or whatever, it's a consideration. Sometimes it can be a good option to know about. And so I think you would want a different tip on your torch, but I'm not exactly sure how that works. Something to look into if you're doing the home gamer, small shop, that sort of thing. So just a note about some of the other stuff that's part of my full-on brazing setup. I like to get these acid brushes in bulk. They're called acid brushes, and so I use this to brush on the Flux. This is Cycle Design Stainless Light Flux. I use this stuff. I liked this a little bit more than like Gasflux brand, and it worked pretty well for me for silver brazing things. And it kind of depends on what alloy of silver and how you're using it. Cycle Design makes sort of like bike frame building specific fluxes, and they also sell some welding rod and stuff. And at least a couple years ago, Wade Baroxy was the sales rep in my area, and so I would call him up, and he was real knowledgeable and helpful, and then I'd order some stuff from him and he'd mail it out to me. And so they were the ones that I'd buy this stuff from. But you can use general purpose fluxes too. I just thought this stuff worked nice. And so you go to put this on the joint, and sometimes it's dried out. I'd reconstitute it with some water. I don't like using the brush to mix it up because you get all these bristles stuck in there, so I'd use something like a clean screwdriver, some sort of like stiff thing, and I'd kind of mix it up and I'd get it to the right consistency, and then you'd brush it on with these brushes. So I'm a fan of this stuff. And if you were bronze brazing, you'd want a different flux that, the flux is used for a number of things to protect against oxidation and to be used as like a temperature indicator and to allow the smooth capillary action, to help stuff flow and whatever. And yeah, I thought this stuff worked great. I thought it soaked off a little bit easier. After you do the braze and you let things cool very slowly, then you can soak the joint in like warm water and you can scrub off the flux. And I thought this stuff came off easier than if I was using Gasflux brand. I didn't think that came off as easily as this stuff just kind of melts right off, which is great. You need like a striker or some sort of way to light the torch, right? And so these are like, just a couple bucks. And yeah, I don't know, you could use all sorts of things to light the flame, but I like this one here. I think there's some consumables here that are replaceable, and I could probably replace this with a new flint, but this gave me quite a few good years of service. These are Uvex Shade 3 welding glasses or brazing glasses. And so, I mean, from a safety standpoint, I'm not sure if these are what everybody would recommend. Shade 3 gives you quite a bit of protection from the bright light of the flame, and they come in all different shades. So like if you're welding, a welding hood is usually a shade 10, like a general purpose welding hood for arc welding and stuff is a shade 10. This is a shade 3, and you know, the purpose of that is to protect your eyes, but also to let your eyes more adjust so you can see the sort of sensitivity of, like, you know, you're really looking for certain colors and stuff, and you want to be able to see the flame, and so wearing these really helps you kind of see what you're doing. I used a shade 3. There's probably an argument to use a heavier shade for certain things, and so I can't really speak to that with a whole lot of authority. The frame building class that I had was didn't really emphasize safety that much, and we just used regular sunglasses, and so this was something that I studied on my own later, and I came to the conclusion that a shade 3 was probably acceptable. This is some 56% silver brazing wire, and that's what I would use for general purpose brazing, and you can get different alloys of the brazing wire, you know, so I would use, I think, 56% silver a lot of times, and then I maybe also had some 50% or 48% or something. And if you talk to the sales rep from Cycle Design, Wade, or someone else, you know, you could get a sense of how the different alloys, some of them are sort of like thicker and some of them are thinner, and so if you're doing certain kinds of braze-ons, you might want to use the thicker stuff and it wets out and makes a bigger fillet. And if you're doing something like lugs where you're passing it through a long you know, passageway, you might want to use the thinner stuff. You know, there's different applications, and the more you do it, the more you test things, the more you get an idea of what works for you. But these are the common stuff. You know, I don't do a whole lot of bronze brazing anymore because I'm mostly TIG welding my frames, and then I'm just using the silver brazing to put on little braze-ons and cable guides and stuff. So one more thing I want to talk about is gas savers and gas fluxers. And I really wanted to get both of these things in the past, but I just kind of worked myself away from brazing everything. You know, when I was fillet brazing and lugged brazing the bicycle frames I was making, I was like, damn, I gotta get a gas fluxer, I gotta get a gas saver, and now that's less of a priority for me, and I probably won't get one at this point because I just don't do a whole lot of that. A gas fluxer is a device that you put in line between the regulators and the torch, and the flux is in the flame. It's made by the company Gas Flux, and so you put in you know, a liquid flux, and then you know, the flux is its own thing. You know, this video isn't intended to explain brazing, but for people who don't know about a gas fluxer, you don't need to necessarily brush the flux on the joint. The flux actually comes through your hoses and it's in the flame. And I think some people would put flux on the joint and have the flux coming through the hoses, and I've seen some people also not put any flux on the joint and they just use the gas fluxer. I can't speak to what's the best practice. I haven't tried it, I don't really know, but they apparently really help you, you know, like sometimes when you're brazing stuff, the flux sort of, especially if you don't have the best heat control and you're cooking the joint or something, your flux can kind of burn up or dry out or whatever. And the gas fluxer helps with that. And it's just, they're apparently awesome. Everybody who has them seems to like them. So, you know, the gas fluxer is a cool upgrade that you can get. The gas saver is really cool. It's this device where you have like a little hook that you hang the torch on, and the hook is a valve. And so when you hang your torch on it, what it does is it shuts off the flow to your torch, and so the flame goes off, and then there's like a little pilot flame that stays lit. And when you lift the torch off again, it opens up the valves, and your regulators are already adjusted, and these valves are already adjusted, and so you just pass the tip of your torch past that little pilot flame, and poof, it lights up again, and everything should be more or less adjusted the same. And so that way, it'd be really practical in bike frame brazing and stuff, because like when you're making a bike frame, you know, you have the frame, and you know, you're doing the joint or whatever, and then you need to reposition, and constantly gravity is a consideration, and also you know, if you're laying down like a, you know, if you're fillet brazing, you can't fillet braze upside down really, because while it's liquid, it's affected by gravity. So gravity is always a consideration. You're repositioning the frame in like in a bike holding stand of some sort as you're doing the brazing, and so while you're repositioning, it's nice to be able to set the torch down. And let's say this is a lit torch and there's a big flame coming out of it. If I set it down like this gently as to not adjust the knobs, I have the flame pointed up here, and it probably won't catch anything on fire. Fingers crossed. That's not really that safe. Also, it's generating a lot of heat generally, and then the worst of it is, well, I think the worst of it is the safety consideration, but it's using gas that whole time, right? Like there's all this gas coming out of the tanks that, you know, you kind of hate to be wasting. And so the gas saver allows you a safer, but also, you know, gas economical option to hang your torch and then to have both hands to do whatever you're doing and pick up the torch again and continue brazing. I would love to have a gas saver. I just don't do a whole lot of brazing anymore, and it's not that big of a deal. So I would definitely look into those if you're doing a lot of brazing. You know, they're really cool things, but yeah, they're a couple $100 each, or I haven't priced one out in forever, so I don't really know, but they're a cool piece of kit. You don't need them. They're just totally awesome. So one more thing I should mention is that if you are TIG welding a steel frame and you're only using your torch rig for the braze-ons, right, just the cable guides and stuff, and maybe like a head tube reinforcing ring, some little stuff, and you're not doing that much, I would really consider getting one of those small portable like map gas torches, the ones that you can buy at a hardware store, and they're this big, and you just squeeze the trigger and it's got a little, you know, flint thing in it or whatever, and it lights the flame, and it doesn't give you the same kind of control over what flame you have as having like a proper brazing torch or, you know, heating torch that has different tip sizes and all that stuff. It's just going to give you this kind of broad flame. It's not ideal, but it's so much cheaper. It's so much simpler. You don't need to go to the welding store. You don't need hoses and regulators and a special torch, and it's so simple. And I've seen like very legitimate bike frame builders who, you know, weld out most of the frame and they're just doing braze-ons and stuff. I'm thinking of Eric Bear at Ground Up Speed Shop. I've seen him do that in some of his Instagram videos, but there's a number of people. It's a totally viable option. The gas is expensive. The little tanks that you get, it's not going to be the same kind of value that you get, but if you're just using small quantities of gas, that's a totally awesome way to go. And so if I didn't already have my torch rig from the days when I was doing more brazing oriented stuff, and I was only using brazing as a way to get on cable guides and stuff on my frames, that's probably what I would do. So I think there's a debate to be had about like what's the best, what gives you the most control, whatever, but I would say you can absolutely get good results with one of those cheap you know, little I don't know what they're called, little map gas torches. You can get great results for the sake of braze-ons and stuff, and so I would definitely look into that. Anyway, I hope you found the video useful. I just wanted to provide some perspective about the larger picture of it. There are people who know way more about brazing than me, and I'm not an expert, but you know, I've collected some ideas about, you know, general things, and so I just wanted to share that. Yeah, hit that subscribe button. We'll see you on the next video where we're talking about even more bike frame building related stuff.